Talk to yourself like this for just 3 days. When you first hear that, it might sound too simple, almost too good to be true. But Neville Goddard, one of the most profound teachers of the mind, often said, change your inner conversation and you will change your outer world. Every day, without even noticing, we hold an endless dialogue in our minds. We question, complain, predict, worry, hope. Most of the time, that voice is unconscious, running on old beliefs, old stories, and outdated fears. And here's the truth: those silent conversations shape the reality you walk into tomorrow. Neville believed, and countless lives have proven, that our imagination is not a daydream factory, but the blueprint of our future. He taught that what you whisper to yourself in the stillness of your own mind becomes the seed of your lived experience. Whether those seeds are weeds or roses depends entirely on what you're planting. So imagine this: for just 3 days, you become deliberate about that inner dialogue. You stop letting fear have the microphone. You refuse to speak defeat over your life. You begin to affirm, in a way that feels real, the life you actually want. 3 days, 72 hours. Not to fight the world, but to re-script the story you tell yourself about who you are and what's possible. Neville didn't ask people to a blind faith. He asked them to test this. Try it. 3 days. Then watch. Because if you truly take control of your inner conversation, your outer life will have no choice but to follow. Inner conversation is not just a passing thought or idle chatter in the mind. It is the foundation upon which the entire structure of our reality is built. Neville Goddard emphasized that what we say to ourselves in the privacy of our own consciousness is far more important than what we say out loud to others. The silent dialogue within is like a constant background music that sets the tone for our emotional state, decisions, and eventual experiences. Many people assume that reality is shaped by external circumstances, but Neville insisted that it is the internal world, our assumptions, beliefs, and self-talk, that truly molds the conditions of our lives. Every thought, every mental whisper, every quiet assumption is like a brick being laid in the invisible architecture of our future. We may not see the construction immediately, but it is happening relentlessly, day and night. When we are not aware of this process, the mind runs on autopilot. Old habits of thought picked up from childhood, society, and repeated experiences dictate the script we rehearse internally. Without realizing it, we often replay scenes of failure, rehearse conversations of defeat, and affirm limitations as though they were unchangeable facts. This unconscious self-talk becomes a loop, reinforcing the same patterns over and over. Neville taught that life will always mirror these inner patterns, not because of some mystical coincidence, but because consciousness is creative and reality is its reflection. Whatever we consistently impress upon the subconscious mind through repeated inner conversations eventually hardens into fact in the physical world. Consider how often we prepare for events in our mind before they happen. If someone has a meeting tomorrow, they might mentally rehearse how it will go. If their rehearsal is filled with doubt, imagining the other person rejecting their ideas, that image becomes a seed planted in the soil of the subconscious. The subconscious, which does not argue or reason, simply accepts the dominant feeling as true and begins moving circumstances to match it. This is why Neville stressed the importance of becoming a deliberate director of these inner dialogues. When we choose to speak inwardly from the state of the wish fulfilled, acting as though what we desire is already real, we begin to construct a new inner world. This construction is not metaphorical in the sense of being imaginary only. It is as real as laying the foundation of a building. The only difference is that we cannot yet see it with our physical eyes. But just as an architect can see the entire finished building in his mind before the first stone is laid, our inner conversations are the blueprints from which life builds our experiences. When we understand this, we realize that we are never at the mercy of circumstances. Circumstances are the downstream effect, the final echo of conversations we've been holding within ourselves, often for years. Neville would often give practical examples to illustrate this principle. He would tell stories of individuals who, by changing the tone and content of their inner conversations, transformed relationships, careers, and health. For example, someone who felt ignored or undervalued might be in the habit of imagining scenes in which they are dismissed or overlooked. Without knowing it, they rehearse this treatment daily in their mind, and life obliges by sending them people and events that match. But when they deliberately change the script, imagining conversations where they are respected, valued, and appreciated, the outer reflection must shift to mirror the new inner pattern. It is crucial to understand that the creative power lies not just in affirmations repeated mechanically, but in the feeling and conviction behind them. If someone says, "I am successful," but their inner conversation is filled with fear, doubt, and self-criticism, the dominant emotional tone will still be one of failure. Neville taught that the subconscious responds to the feeling of the inner conversation, not just the words. This is why we must speak inwardly as if the desired state is already a living reality, infusing our inner words with the tone, mood, and emotional color that match our fulfilled desire. Think of the mind as a stage on which countless scenes are played every day. Some of these scenes are pleasant, others are filled with worry or conflict, but they all leave an impression. The actors on this stage are not random. They are the versions of ourselves and others that we keep alive in our imagination. If we constantly imagine ourselves as a victim of circumstances, being mistreated, or failing in our endeavors, then those are the roles that dominate our stage. And since the outer world is simply the shadow cast by this inner stage play, the same roles will appear in the events and interactions of our life. But if we replace those inner performances with scenes of victory, harmony and fulfillment, the shadow must inevitably change. This is why Neville called the inner conversation the beginning and end of creation. Everything begins here, in this unseen world of thought and feeling. Before any success or failure appears outwardly, it has been rehearsed many times in the mind. To change the outer, one must first change the inner rehearsal. The challenge, of course, is that many people are unaware of what they are rehearsing. It happens so automatically, so subtly, that it feels like the natural background of life. The first step, then, is awareness, catching ourselves in the act of speaking inwardly in ways that contradict our desires. Once we become aware, the next step is replacement. We do not merely stop the negative inner talk, we replace it with conversations that reflect the reality we wish to experience. Neville advised that we speak from the end, meaning we imagine that we are already in possession of what we desire and converse from that state. If someone wants to be in a loving relationship, they might imagine hearing a partner's affectionate words, feeling the warmth of shared moments, and engaging in inner dialogues that affirm their worthiness of love. Over time, these conversations create such a vivid sense of reality within that the subconscious accepts it as fact, and the outer world rearranges itself to reflect it. Inner conversation, then, is not a passive or trivial activity. It is the creative workshop of life, the silent architect shaping the landscape of our days. To neglect it is to allow old patterns to dictate our future. To master it is to claim authorship over our experience. Neville's teaching here is not abstract philosophy. It is a direct, testable practice. Every moment, we have the choice to either repeat the tired scripts of the past or to compose new ones that lead to the life we truly desire. The voice in our head is not a background noise to be ignored. It is the author, narrator, and director of our personal reality, and it never stops working. If you want, I can now expand Keynote Fight 2 in the same deep, flowing style so it connects seamlessly with this. That way your speech will read like a single immersive piece. Most people move through their days without ever stopping to truly listen to the constant stream of words running through their minds. This inner commentary is so habitual, so familiar, that it blends into the background like the hum of an air conditioner. You know it's there, but you rarely pay attention to it. Yet it is shaping your emotional state, coloring your perception, and quietly steering your actions. Neville Goddard taught that awareness of these unconscious self-talk patterns is essential if you want to take control of your reality. Because until you become aware, you cannot change what is being spoken in the privacy of your own mind. The unconscious self-talk often begins in early life, seated by the voices of parents, teachers, peers, and authority figures. Over time, their opinions, judgments, and emotional tones are absorbed and internalized, becoming a script that continues to play long after the original speakers are gone. If you grew up hearing that you are not good enough, not smart enough, or not capable enough, you may find that these phrases echo silently in your thoughts even decades later. The tragic part is that because these words are so familiar, they can feel like truth rather than an opinion you once heard. Without awareness, you might not even notice them operating. You simply feel the effects: hesitation, self-doubt, or a sense of limitation. Neville's emphasis was never on fighting against these old voices with force, but on recognizing them as stories you've been telling yourself and realizing that you have the power to tell a different one. Awareness is like turning on a light in a dark room. You suddenly see the furniture that's been there all along. Once you notice the words you've been repeating, you can begin to question them. Are they actually true? Or are they simply old mental habits, the residue of past experiences that no longer apply to the person you are now? Becoming aware of unconscious self-talk requires slowing down and observing the flow of your thoughts. This is not about judging yourself or feeling guilty for negative thoughts. It is about cultivating the skill of noticing. You might start by paying attention in moments of emotional reaction. When you feel anxious, rejected, or frustrated, pause and ask, what am I saying to myself right now? The words may be subtle. They may be more of a tone or an implication than a fully formed sentence. But if you catch them, you'll often find they are surprisingly direct. This always happens to me. I'm not good enough for this. They probably think I'm incompetent. These are not objective observations. They are unconscious affirmations being impressed upon your mind. Neville understood that the power of these thoughts lies in their repetition and in the emotional charge behind them. The more you rehearse a particular line of inner dialogue, the more it feels like reality, and the more it conditions your expectations for the future. If you've been unconsciously saying, "No one ever listens to me," for years you've built an entire mental world in which that is true. The subconscious mind takes these repeated statements as instructions, arranging your experiences to match the assumption. And because life reflects it back to you, it feels even more true, creating a loop that is hard to break without awareness. One of the most startling realizations you may have when you begin this practice is how negative, critical, or limiting much of your inner commentary actually is. This is not because you are inherently pessimistic, but because the human mind is wired to focus on threats, problems, and self-protection. Left unchecked, the mind will replay fears from the past and prepare for imagined disasters in the future. Without awareness, you may spend hours each day speaking defeat into your own life, reinforcing the very conditions you want to escape. Awareness breaks this cycle. When you hear yourself thinking, "I'll probably fail," you have a moment of choice. You can either let that thought pass unchecked into the fertile soil of the subconscious, or you can stop and replace it with something new. Neville called this the pruning shears of revision, cutting away the old, unproductive self-talk and planting seeds that align with the life you want. But the pruning shears only work if you can see the plant you're cutting. Without awareness, you keep watering weeds without knowing it. It's also important to notice that unconscious self-talk is not always negative in an obvious way. Sometimes it is disguised as practicality or realism. You might say to yourself, "Well, I can't expect too much," or "Things like that don't happen for people like me." These sound reasonable on the surface, but they are still assumptions that limit what your mind will allow you to experience. The outer world will never contradict the inner laws you have accepted for yourself. One method Neville suggested for developing awareness is to pay attention during idle moments. Those times when you are walking, showering, or drifting before sleep. These are the moments when the mind tends to wander into its habitual grooves. Listen carefully then. What stories are you replaying? Are you imagining conversations where you defend yourself against criticism? Are you picturing scenarios where things go wrong? These mental rehearsals are not harmless. They are creation in progress. By becoming aware of them, you reclaim the steering wheel of your imagination. Another sign of unconscious self-talk is when your outer life feels like it is running on a script you didn't consciously choose. The same types of people, problems, and situations keep showing up no matter where you go. Neville would say this is because the inner conversation has not changed, and so the outer stage set remains the same. By bringing the unconscious into consciousness, you can finally change the underlying script and watch the scenery shift. It is also helpful to notice how unconscious self-talk can be self-fulfilling. For example, if you believe people don't respect me, you might unconsciously speak and act in ways that invite disrespect. Perhaps by apologizing excessively, avoiding eye contact, or failing to assert your needs. When people respond accordingly, it confirms your original belief, which then becomes even more ingrained. Awareness interrupts this loop, allowing you to choose words and actions that align with a new story. The act of noticing does not require you to immediately fix or replace every negative thought. At first, it is enough to simply see them clearly and acknowledge that they are not facts, but mental habits. This simple recognition weakens their grip because it creates a gap between "I am this thought" and "I am the observer of this thought." Neville emphasized that the self, the I am, is always greater than any idea it entertains. You are not your old conversations, you are the one who can choose new ones. The more often you catch yourself in unconscious self-talk, the more quickly you can pivot toward intentional conversation. Over time, the very act of noticing becomes second nature. What was once unconscious begins to feel almost loud and obvious, and you can shift it before it gathers emotional momentum. This is when real change begins to happen, because you are no longer a passive receiver of inherited scripts. You are the conscious author of your own narrative, selecting the inner words that will crystallize into outer events. Imagination is not a child's pastime, a fanciful escape from reality, or a mere tool for artistic creation. Neville Goddard taught that imagination is the very blueprint from which reality is constructed, the original cause of every condition, event, and circumstance we encounter in life. The outer world, with all its apparent solidity, is nothing more than the shadow or echo of the images and ideas we hold within. Before anything can exist in the physical realm, it must first exist in the unseen world of imagination. This is why Neville called imagination the creative power of God within us, an inner faculty that is constantly shaping and reshaping the world we experience. From the moment we wake in the morning to the moment we drift into sleep, we are imagining. Sometimes these imaginal acts are deliberate, but more often they are unconscious, repeating old scenarios, fears, and expectations without our awareness. Every thought, every mental picture, every inner scene is a seed being planted in the subconscious mind, which then produces the corresponding outer reality. This is not an abstract metaphor, it is the law of consciousness at work. Just as an architect cannot construct a building without first drafting a design, life cannot present us with an experience that we have not first imagined in some form. Neville often reminded his listeners that imagination creates both the good and the unwanted. If you imagine failure, even without intending to, you are still giving life to that image. The subconscious does not filter or judge. It simply accepts the most dominant impressions and brings them forth into experience. This is why daydreaming about success while secretly fearing the worst often leads to mixed or unsatisfying results. The blueprint is not just the bright picture you try to hold. It is the total emotional tone of your imaginal activity. Understanding imagination as reality's blueprint shifts the entire way we approach life. Most people try to change the outer world directly, struggling to manipulate circumstances, control people, or push against obstacles. But if the outer is only the shadow, then working on it alone is like trying to change the shape of a shadow without altering the object casting it. Neville taught that the true work is always within, crafting in imagination the scene you wish to experience until it feels so real, so natural that the subconscious accepts it as fact. Once the blueprint is complete, the outer construction follows automatically. This is why Neville emphasized the importance of living in the end. To live in the end means to imagine and feel as though your desire is already fulfilled, to create in your mind the sensory reality of having and being what you want, and to dwell in that state until it becomes natural. It is not enough to vaguely wish for something. You must inhabit the mental scene as if it were happening now, hearing the voices, seeing the surroundings, and feeling the emotions that would be present if it were already true. In doing so, you impress the subconscious with a detailed, vivid plan, and it will faithfully reproduce it in your outer world. The power of imagination as the blueprint of reality can be seen in everyday examples. Consider an athlete who mentally rehearses their performance before stepping onto the field. Science confirms what Neville had been teaching decades earlier. The brain responds to imagined experiences in much the same way it does to physical ones, strengthening the same neural pathways and preparing the body for action. By imagining the perfect execution repeatedly, the athlete is not merely thinking positively. They are installing a blueprint into their mind that the body and circumstances will follow. The same principle applies to relationships, career, health, and every other area of life. If you wish to experience harmonious relationships, you must imagine conversations, gestures, and moments of understanding as if they were already happening. If you want to advance in your career, you must picture yourself in the role, feeling the satisfaction and confidence that comes with it. If you desire healing, you must envision yourself whole, vibrant, and free of limitation, refusing to give more reality to the condition than to the vision of health. These imaginal acts, when sustained, become the silent architects of your future. Neville also warned of the danger of careless imagination. Many people unknowingly use this power against themselves by dwelling on worst-case scenarios, mentally rehearsing conflicts, or imagining the persistence of unwanted conditions. Just as a detailed blueprint ensures a specific building will be constructed, repeated negative imagery ensures that life will eventually reflect those fears. This is why becoming conscious of one's imagination is not just empowering, it is essential. You are always designing, whether you do so deliberately or not, and the outer construction will never contradict the inner design. Imagination is not bound by the limitations of the physical senses. You may not see a way for your desire to be fulfilled, but imagination is not concerned with how. Its role is to create the end result. The bridge of events leading to that result is the domain of the subconscious and the infinite intelligence that animates life. This is why Neville urged his students to ignore the seeming impossibility of a desire and to give all their attention to the scene of fulfillment. In the imaginal world, there are no barriers of time, space, or resources, only the question of whether you can accept the reality of the scene you have created. Some resist this idea because they cannot see the connection between what they imagine and what they later experience. But the process is not always immediate. and the unfolding of the blueprint may come through channels you did not anticipate. You may imagine a new career and, within months, find yourself meeting someone who introduces you to an opportunity that perfectly matches the vision. You may imagine reconciliation with a friend, and, without consciously reaching out, receive a message from them out of the blue. The link between the imaginal act and the outer event may seem indirect, but it is no less real. Neville's teaching here offers both liberation and responsibility. Liberation, because you no longer have to wait for the world to give you permission to have what you desire. Responsibility, because you must take ownership of the images you are entertaining. It is not enough to blame fate, luck, or other people when the blueprint being followed was one you unconsciously designed. Once you accept that imagination is the source, you also accept that it is within your power to design something new. The practice, then, is to become a conscious architect. Each day offers countless opportunities to pause and check the images you are creating. When you notice yourself imagining lack, failure, or limitation, you can revise the scene on the spot, replacing it with one that matches your ideal. This is not pretending in the sense of ignoring reality. It is consciously creating the reality that will later appear. You are moving your attention from what is to what you choose to be, knowing that the latter will eventually dominate the former. The more vividly and consistently you hold the blueprint in imagination, the more inevitable its physical manifestation becomes. Just as a detailed architectural plan guides every stage of a building's construction, a well-formed imaginal act guides every stage of life's unfolding toward the fulfillment of your desire. And just as no building can appear without first existing as a plan, no experience can appear in your life without first existing in the realm of imagination. Speaking only what you wish to manifest is not merely a practice of polite or positive speech. It is a deliberate act of creation that aligns the spoken word with the life you intend to live. Neville Goddard emphasized that the words you utter, whether aloud or in the privacy of your own mind, are not idle expressions. They are commands impressed upon the subconscious, instructions to the creative power within you. Every spoken word carries an emotional vibration, and when it is repeated with feeling, it becomes a seed planted in the fertile ground of the subconscious, which then produces a matching harvest in the outer world. Most people speak carelessly, unaware that their constant verbal affirmations, both positive and negative, are shaping their experiences in ways they may not desire. When you choose to speak only what you wish to manifest, you are engaging in the disciplined art of planting only the seeds that will yield the kind of life you want. This means refusing to give voice to complaints, fears, or statements that contradict your desires. If you want prosperity, you cannot afford to speak of lack. If you want harmony, you cannot speak of conflict. If you want health, you cannot continually describe your ailments and limitations. This discipline is not about denying facts, but about refusing to give those facts greater life through repetition and reinforcement. Neville taught that to speak of what you do not want is to call it into continued existence. Speech, whether inner or outer, crystallizes thought into form. The subconscious mind is impressionable and literal. It does not differentiate between a statement made in jest, in frustration, or in earnest. If you repeatedly say, "I never get a break," the subconscious takes that as an instruction and arranges events to confirm it. If you say, "Everything works out for me," the subconscious likewise accepts that as a directive and orchestrates circumstances in alignment. The words become a self-fulfilling prophecy, not because of magic in the superficial sense, but because speech is an outward extension of inner belief, and belief is the mold from which experience is cast. Neville would often caution against indulging in idle conversation that reinforces unwanted conditions. Gossip, criticism, and retelling negative experiences are all forms of planting seeds you may not wish to harvest. When you recount a story of injustice, failure, or frustration, even if it happened years ago, you are reviving the emotional state connected to it, impressing it again upon the subconscious, and increasing the likelihood of its repetition in some form. This is why the conscious selection of speech is both protective and creative. It shields you from reinforcing the unwanted while strengthening the reality of the desired. To speak only what you wish to manifest also requires awareness of tone and feeling. Words spoken mechanically, without conviction, have little effect compared to words infused with genuine emotion. If you declare, "I am successful," but do so with doubt in your voice and tension in your body, the feeling contradicts the statement, and it is the feeling that impresses the subconscious most deeply. Neville's instruction was always to speak from the state of the wish fulfilled, allowing your tone, expression, and inner mood to match the reality you are claiming. The subconscious responds to this congruence between word and feeling with certainty and speed. This practice extends beyond formal affirmations into every casual exchange of daily life. The way you answer simple questions like, "How are you?" or "How's business?" becomes part of your creative speech. Many answer automatically, "I'm tired," "It's been slow," or "I'm barely getting by," without realizing that these are affirmations too. The disciplined practitioner uses even these moments to affirm the desired state, replying with statements like, "I'm feeling great," "Things are going really well," or "Business is growing every day," not as empty platitudes, but as conscious declarations of the reality they wish to solidify. The reason this discipline is so powerful is that speech both reflects and reinforces belief. When you speak from the end, the state in which your desire is already fulfilled, you are not only declaring it to the world, you are also hearing yourself say it. This repetition conditions your own mind to accept it as normal and natural. Over time, the gap between the spoken word and the outer experience closes because the inner state it creates becomes dominant. It is also important to be aware of the indirect way speech can undermine your desires. Sarcasm, self-deprecating humor, and exaggeration for dramatic effect may seem harmless, but the subconscious does not process them as jokes. If you frequently say, "I'm hopeless with money," or "I'm always unlucky," even in a playful tone, you are still affirming those conditions. Speaking only what you wish to manifest requires vigilance, catching these habits in the moment and replacing them with words that align with your chosen reality. Neville's students often found that as they adopted this discipline, their environment began to change. Relationships became more harmonious because they no longer spoke words that fueled conflict. Opportunities appeared where before there had been none because they no longer reinforced the belief in lack. Health improved because they stopped affirming illness and began affirming vitality. In each case, the shift began not in action but in speech, for speech is the bridge between thought and manifestation. Even silent speech, the inner dialogue that never reaches another person's ears, must be guarded in the same way. In many cases, inner speech is more influential than outer speech because it is more frequent and often more emotionally charged. You may smile and say something pleasant outwardly while inwardly arguing, criticizing, or worrying. The subconscious hears only the inner voice and responds accordingly. Therefore, to speak only what you wish to manifest means aligning both your spoken and unspoken words with your desired reality, so there is no contradiction between the two. When this alignment becomes consistent, you begin to feel the solidity of the new reality within you. Speaking abundance feels natural, speaking harmony feels normal, speaking health feels like the truth. At this point, the outer world must conform, because it has no choice but to mirror the dominant inner pattern. You are no longer scattering seeds of mixed conditions with careless words. You are deliberately planting a single, coherent vision and watching it grow into tangible form.